Inherency. Legalization is inevitable, but piecemeal state policies will result in corporate cannabis, Kleinman 2014. Colorado and Washington endorse legalizing commercial production and sale. That goes further than medical marijuana laws in 20 states. Similar propositions are likely in a dozen other states. Federal law will change to make cannabis legally available. Letting legislation unfold state by state with the Fed a bystander risks a monstrosity. They're quasi-legal, permitted under state, forbidden under federal law. Growers, vendors, lawyers, and bankers could go to prison. As more states legalize, the industry will get richer. We could get locked into a bad system. Increased abuse by minors will be greater than it needs to. Imagine Bush peddling low-cost, high-octane cannabis. We can do better, but only if Congress takes action. Plan. The United States should legalize nearly all marijuana in the United States with federal removal of marijuana from Schedule I of the CSA via policy waivers for states that implement baseline regulations for non-commercial marijuana production and sale. Each of the 50 United States should implement the baseline regulations, which are as follows. First, marijuana can only be produced by state-licensed growers who use pesticide-free cultivation methods and allow periodic testing for chemical content and contaminants. Second, marijuana can only be sold by licensed non-commercial entities with product labels that display information about chemical content. Marijuana should be sold in compliance with federally established minimum prices that are lower than comparable marijuana that is on sale in the illegal market. The post-tax maximum price of legal marijuana should not match or exceed the illegal market price. We reserve the right to clarify intent. Advantage 1, corporate neoliberalism. Part A, impacts. Corporate cannabis will disproportionately target people to exploit dependency for profit. Kleinman 2014. The systems being put in place create a cannabis industry whose commercial interest is opposite the public. Cannabis follows the 80-20 rule. 20% of users account for 80% of volume. From the perspective of cannabis vendors, drug abuse isn't the problem, it's the target demographic. Since we can expect the legal cannabis industry to be financially dependent on dependent consumers, the industry's marketing practices will be dedicated to creating and sustaining problem drug use patterns. The trick to legalizing marijuana is to keep at bay the logic of the market, its tendency to create and exploit people. This will kill hundreds of thousands of Americans each year, Heller 2014. While legalization would cause a period of difficult reprisal, marijuana products seem a logical new industry for tobacco companies. Policymakers should develop and implement policies that would prevent the tobacco industry from becoming directly involved in the marijuana market in a way that would replicate the smoking epidemic which kills 480,000 Americans each year. Part B, advocates. The neoliberal view from nowhere ignores how poverty affects decision-making. Regulation must be seen as an intervention on corporate exploitation. Carnani, 2009. Poor people face worse consequences for their bad choices than more affluent people. Romanticized views of people as value-conscious consumers are harmful. These views lead states to too few regulatory mechanisms to protect the poor. The poor lack the information and other social capital that would allow them to shield themselves against the hierarchies of the market. Research documents that the less income people have, the more likely they are to smoke. Corporations exploit people's vulnerabilities, such as lack of education or desire for cheap relief from chronic stress. And plan short circuits commercial exploitation, Kleinman 2014. If we want to avoid an increase in heavy cannabis use under legalization, we should create policies to keep the price where it is now. Legal production costs would be a fraction of the current level. Product labeling about the chemical composition can help consumers use the drug more safely. What's needed is federal legislation requiring states that legalize cannabis to structure their pot markets such that they won't get captured by commercial interests. States could allow marijuana to be sold only through nonprofit or state-run stores. By contracting with many small growers, states could check the industry's political power. To prevent interstate smuggling, the federal government should mandate a minimum price. Advantage 1, or Advantage 2, prison pipeline, Part A, impacts. Status quo marijuana laws disproportionately target black people, ACLU 2013. For all 50 states, there were 1 million marijuana arrests. Marijuana arrests have increased and account for over half of all drug arrests. A black person is 3.73 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than a white person. And incarceration for drugs is a key mechanism for maintaining a racial hierarchy, Alexander 2006. A new social control does exist as disastrous as Jim Crow, the mass incarceration of people of color. The war on drugs is the most sweeping manifestation. By segregating, incarcerating, and rendering unemployable huge segments of the black and brown population, the racial hierarchy remains intact. By denying blacks equal education, barring them from employment, and relegating them to the worst neighborhoods, felon disenfranchisement laws tilt the scales of power. Mass incarceration results in fewer legislative seats for communities of color. And incarceration is the internal link for accelerating social death. Loneberry, 2012. Imprisonment is a form of social death. The carceral system has become the preeminent institution for enforcing blackness. Inmates are the target of a threefold exclusionary closure. 1, denied access to cultural capital, university credentials, a prerequisite for employment. Inmates made ineligible, grants starting with drug offenders. 2, prisoners are excluded from social redistribution. Laws deny welfare, veteran benefits, and food stamps to anyone in detention for more than 60 days. And 3, political participation. 1 man in 7 is banned from the electoral booth through penal disenfranchisement. Part B, advocates. Legalization benefits lives. Plan interrupts the chain reaction effect of recidivism. Jarecki, 2014. The question would arise whether I was an advocate of marijuana legislation. I responded with saying I did not support legalizing if that meant giving whites no borders access. I've since changed my mind on the importance of marijuana as a target for reformers, owing to the role it plays driving the cycle of community and destruction. Marijuana is a gateway for a lifetime of involvement in the criminal justice system. Arrest for possession can start a chain reaction, life in and out of the system. Legislation would dramatically reduce prisoner numbers while profoundly stemming the time. And plan would benefit millions. It's a strategic rupture from a policy designed to target racial minorities and separate them from opportunity structures, Taylor 2014. For African Americans, advocacy for legalization of personal use of marijuana must be viewed as a strategic means to eradicating the totalitarian hold which the U.S. criminal justice system holds on more than 1 million of their lives. Forms of official repression will deepen and intensify if left unabated. Jim Crow hyperincarceration represents the greatest obstacle to accessing broad opportunity structures that makes for the common good. Marijuana laws are the black codes of the 21st century. They must be eradicated for the sake of the beloved community that guided the hopes of the civil rights movement before the present carceral obsession captured the U.S. punishment system. And plan substantially disrupts the racist prison pipeline. Tape 2014. Blacks, Latinos, and American Indians are arrested more often than whites for possession. Legalization of marijuana would resolve some of the biggest problems of the current drug crisis and war. It will eliminate the illegal market and close off a long and terrible pipeline leading towards mass incarceration. Underview. We should care about who is affected by injustice and exploitation. Our advantage highlights at least 2 areas of concern. Alexander 2014. There are important victories in legalizing marijuana, but the dialogue is driven by fiscal concerns rather than concerns for the communities most impacted. The first arrest is typically some nonviolent minor drug offense. We jail them and release them to a parallel universe where they are locked into a permanent second-class status. This movement is about creating a new ethic of care and concern for each of us. The issue is in the devaluing of human beings. It is possible to reduce addiction and abuse in a non-punitive manner without filling prisons. I support a shift to a public health model with personal use. And general critiques of government action are insufficient for links. Prefer specificity of how a policy is used. We are a challenge to neoliberalism. Ferguson, 2012. The expanding literature on neoliberalism has arrived at the same conclusion. Neoliberalism is bad. We must oppose it. This problem in progressive scholarship strikes me as a problem in progressive politics more broadly. For the last couple of decades, the left organized around a project of resisting. It has left us with politics defined by negation and disdain centered on the antics of anti-neoliberalism. Anti-imperialism, always anti, not pro. In my disciplines of anthropology and African studies, conclude in righteous indignation that the poor are getting screwed. This style is as critique as imagines itself to be very political. What if politics is not about denouncing? What if it's about getting what you want? Such a question brings us to the question of government. Denunciatory analyses treat government as a simple expression of power domination, but any realistic sort of progressive politics that would seek a serious answer to the question, what do we want, will have to involve contemporary possibilities for progressive government. And pessimistic rejection is a new ivory tower paternalism, ignoring the practical effects of our advantages based on a false dichotomy of reform versus revolution. Deldego, 2009. Critical scholars reject piecemeal reform, incremental change. They argue postpones wholesale reformation. An unfair system survives, using piecemeal reform to disguise and legitimize oppression. The critique is imperialistic and wrong. It tells minorities how they should interpret events affecting them. A court order to disperse heating and housing may postpone the revolution, or it may not. In the meantime, the order keeps families warm. Its massive paternalism to assert possibility of revolution later outweighs certainty of heat now. Incremental changes may bring revolutionary changes closer. Reforms may whet the appetite for further combat. Critique of reform misses these possibilities. And reform activates revolution. Even legal tools should be used along the way. Williams, 1968. We must strive to create more favorable legal conditions to disrupt the orderly and uninhibited process of racial justice. We must not be narrow-minded in our scope. When possible, we must use even the legal system we know to be stacked against us. Liberation struggle cannot afford to hamper its possibilities by straddling itself with only one method of struggle. And non-commercial legalization solves waiver incentives, best regulations, Kleinman 2014. The policy waiver would recognize legal cannabis under a state system, making the activities permitted under that system actually legal under federal law, only if the system contained adequate controls to protect public health. That would change the politics of legalization at the state level, with tight controls in order to get and keep the waiver. Then we would see laboratories of democracy doing serious experimentation. Legalization advocates might be willing to accept a non-commercial system. And one example.
Okay, cross-X open. Right, cross-X?
Yes.
Okay. Just to clarify, so you're going to have state licensed farms to grow this marijuana for these state-run stores?
Yeah, we would contract with small private growers.
Small private growers, okay.
Oh, are you talking about cultivation or distribution?
Cultivation.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so your solvency climate card says that problem is in exploitation of those who are addicted. Your regulation solves sort of price of marijuana. So how does your link solve with your solvency? Your solvency doesn't solve the thing you're trying to solve. You even say, I believe in an earlier card that says abuse isn't the problem, but your solvency card says abuse is the problem. So how does your solvency solve your impact?
I'm confused. So
your climate solvency card says that what we really need to solve is exploitation. and your previous impact card says that abuse isn't the problem. So your solvency is not solving for your impact. How does your solvency? My question is, how does your solvency solve your impact?
We're saying that the problem is that if cannabis is commercialized, people with a higher propensity towards addiction will be targeted by the corporate culture. So we're solving for that by creating a non-commercial mechanism.
Can you name me a regulation that solves for the abuse of those who are addicted? You don't regulate. Do you regulate how much marijuana a person can take?
What the idea is that people are going to smoke marijuana whether we legalize it or not, and that's just demonstrably true.
Yes.
If we legalize it in a non-commercial manner, they won't be targeted by companies. We can funnel fewer people into the dependency pipeline.
But won't the state still sell to those who are addicted to marijuana?
Yeah, it doesn't solve addiction in all forms.
So
it prevents people from being targeted by a corporate culture.
Okay, but the state still sells to addicted, so how does that solve for abuse? Because your clemency card says the problem is abuse of those who are addicted.
Right. Because our inherency card says that legalization is coming, and if we let it come on a state-by-state basis, it will come in a commercial manner. So people will be targeted by for-profit corporations, and so it will funnel more people into the dependency.
But you're not answering
pipeline.
my question how the state solves that.
So what
you're
I'm
saying that corporates are bad. I agree, corporations do that are bad, but you're not answering how the state will solve that abuse.
What I'm saying is that our plan does not solve every problem in America right now. It does solve the inevitability of a corporatized marijuana culture, which will create the same effects that the tobacco
you're getting
culture has.
You're getting the lesser of two evils.
We're stemming the tide of commercialized marijuana, which will create an epidemic similar to the smoking epidemic if we don't stop it.
So you're solving for, you say there's still going to be problems after state regulations, including this abuse. So you're saying you're getting the lesser of two evils.
We're solving the issue of the dependency pipeline. We never stated that we were solving every addiction issue.
Okay. Okay.
It's time.
Okay, that's good.
Take a prep.